Waitress saves elderly biker from teen bullies gets fired. 2 hours later, 500 bikers show up. The small diner sat quietly at the edge of town, its bright neon sign flickering in the evening light. It had been the same for years, a place where regulars gathered for their morning coffee and where the smell of sizzling bacon and fresh brewed coffee never seemed to fade. Inside, there was the soft hum of chatter, the clink of silverware, and the occasional chime of the doorbell whenever someone entered or left. At the counter stood Emily, the waitress. She was a young woman in her 20s, with bright eyes and a kind smile. Her long brown hair was tied back into a ponytail, and her apron was slightly worn from the countless hours of work. But she didn't mind. This job paid her bills and gave her a sense of routine. Every morning, she arrived early and worked until late afternoon, getting to know the regulars by name, making sure they had their usual coffee or meal, and always finding time to chat. But today was different. Emily could feel it in the air. The usual quiet hum of the diner seemed thicker somehow, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Maybe it was the unusually warm weather or the tension in the air, but as she moved between tables, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. In the corner booth, an elderly man sat alone, sipping his coffee. His worn leather jacket was covered in patches that showed the miles he had ridden on his motorcycle. The man's gray beard flowed down to his chest, and his wrinkled face was framed by a weathered helmet resting on the table in front of him. His name was Jack, and while most people would have seen a rough, tough biker, there was something different about him. Despite his appearance, his eyes held the weight of many years and many stories. Jack was a retired biker who had lived through countless adventures, both good and bad. But now, his world had slowed down. He preferred to spend his days at places like this diner, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. Emily had noticed him many times before. He was a regular, coming in every few days to have a quiet meal and catch up on the news. She had always thought of him as a little mysterious, but kind. He would always wave when she brought his coffee, and he never rushed her, always asking her about her day. Today, however, as she looked over at him, she couldn't help but notice how tired he seemed, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. The doorbell jingled, and 3 teenage boys walked in. They were loud, laughing and joking as they pushed each other around. Emily smiled politely as they sat at a nearby table, but her smile quickly faded when she saw where they were looking. They had spotted Jack, and from the looks on their faces, they were already planning something. At first, Emily didn't think much of it. Teenagers often played pranks, and sometimes they could be a little rude. But then, one of the boys got up and walked over to Jack. He started by mocking his leather jacket, pointing to the patches with a snicker. Jack didn't respond. He simply took another sip of his coffee, trying to ignore the teasing. But the boy wasn't finished. The second boy joined in, grabbing Jack's helmet from the table. He tossed it from one hand to the other, laughing loudly. "What's this? A biker grandpa," he sneered, his voice full of mockery. Jack looked up, his eyes hardening just slightly, but he didn't say anything. He simply reached out, asking the boy to give him his helmet back. The third boy, who had been watching from the side, stepped closer. "You're not going to do anything about it, old man," he jeered, his tone dripping with disrespect. Jack, clearly annoyed, stood up slowly. His joints ached, but he was a man who had seen enough to know that some things were best left alone. He asked once again for his helmet. But the boys just laughed harder. They started to toss it around like it was a game, treating Jack's belongings like they didn't matter. That's when Emily noticed something in Jack's eyes. It wasn't fear or anger, but something deeper. It was a quiet sadness. The kind of sadness that came from years of being overlooked and dismissed. Emily couldn't stand it anymore. She had been watching the scene unfold in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to do something. Without thinking, she walked over to the table where the boys were, standing between them and Jack. "Give him back his helmet," she said, her voice steady but firm. The boys turned to look at her, surprised by her sudden appearance. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the first boy scoffed. "What's your problem, lady?" he sneered, looking her up and down. "I said, give it back," Emily repeated, her voice even firmer this time. The boys laughed again, but this time it wasn't the carefree laughter from before. It was forced, uncomfortable. Emily was standing her ground, and they weren't used to being challenged. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. One of the boys finally dropped the helmet onto the table, but not before giving Emily a smug look. "You think you can boss us around? What's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice mocking. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Jack and placed the helmet gently back in front of him. "There," she said, smiling at him. "It's yours again." Jack looked up at her, his expression softening. For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to figure out if he was dreaming. Then, he whispered a simple, "Thank you." Emily smiled back at him, nodding. "You're welcome." The boys huffed and grumbled, but they left the diner, clearly embarrassed. They mumbled something under their breath, but no one could hear them clearly. Emily turned to Jack and saw the gratitude in his eyes. It made her heart swell with a sense of pride, but it also made her feel sad for him. No one should be treated like that. But what she didn't know was that what had just happened was only the beginning. As Emily went back to the counter to clean up, she had no idea that this act of kindness would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. It wasn't just about the helmet. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The diner, usually a quiet refuge for locals, had a strange energy that day. After Emily had confronted the three teenagers, everything seemed to return to normal. The last of the laughing boys had left, and the tension in the air slowly began to fade. Emily felt a sense of relief, but she also knew that things weren't entirely resolved. She had just stood up for someone, and part of her feared that it could cause problems. As she went about cleaning up the table, wiping down the counter, and checking on other customers, she couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet din of the diner wouldn't last for long. It wasn't that she expected anything bad to happen. She had just worked here for so long that she knew how quickly small things could spiral out of control. A few minutes later, Emily heard the familiar sound of the manager, Mr. Collins, walking out from his office. His footsteps were heavy, and his voice was already loud before he even reached the counter. She could tell that something was wrong, but she couldn't have imagined how much trouble she was about to find herself in. "Emily, can I see you in the back for a minute?" Mr. Collins' voice was stern, and his tone left no room for argument. Emily's stomach dropped, but she nodded and followed him into the back office. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and she stood awkwardly by the desk as Mr. Collins sat down. He adjusted his glasses and folded his arms across his chest, looking at her with a disapproving glare. "You've caused a scene today, Emily," he said without any preamble. "Do you know what you've done?" Emily felt a chill run through her. She thought back to the incident with the teenagers. Had she done something wrong? All she had done was stand up for Jack. It had felt like the right thing to do, but now she wasn't so sure. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mr. Collins cut her off. "That's not the way we handle things around here," he said sharply. "You don't confront customers, especially not those three. They've been coming here for years, and they won't be back if they feel unwelcome. You're lucky they didn't make a bigger deal out of it. This is a business, Emily. You can't just act on impulse." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had expected some kind of reprimand, but this? She hadn't expected to be told that standing up for someone could cost her. She swallowed hard and tried to explain. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble, Mr. Collins. I just couldn't stand seeing them treat Jack like that. He didn't deserve it." Mr. Collins' expression hardened. "Well, you should have kept quiet. This place isn't about doing what's right. It's about making money, and upsetting regular customers doesn't help with that." Emily's face flushed, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She felt the sting of his words, but she refused to back down. "Jack deserves respect, too. He's a regular, and he's never caused any trouble here. It's not just about the money, Mr. Collins. It's about how we treat people." Mr. Collins let out a heavy sigh and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, Emily thought he might understand, but then he spoke again. "You don't understand, Emily. This is a business. And businesses don't care about kindness. They care about customers walking in the door and paying for food. You've made a bad impression today. I can't have that kind of behavior in my diner." Emily's stomach twisted. She was hurt, but there was also a rising anger in her chest. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply stepped in when she saw someone being mistreated. Was that really such a crime? The silence in the room grew heavy. Emily felt like she was suffocating. She tried to hold back the tears welling up in her eyes, but it was hard. She had worked here for so long, and now, it seemed like it meant nothing. She thought about the tips she'd earned, the friends she'd made, the small conversations she had every day with the regulars. It was all being thrown away in a matter of seconds. Mr. Collins broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Emily, but I have to let you go. I can't have you causing disruptions in the diner. You're fired." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She stood frozen for a moment, unable to fully process what had just happened. Fired? Over standing up for someone? Her mind raced, but she couldn't think clearly. She had lost her job. The thing that had helped her pay her rent and buy food. It was gone in an instant. She started, but the words didn't come. She had no idea what to say. All she wanted was to go back to the way things were before, to feel safe in the familiar routine. But it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Mr. Collins didn't look at her as she turned to leave. He simply nodded and said, "I'll pay you for today, but that's it. Pack up your things, and please don't make a scene on your way out." Emily's heart shattered. She walked back out to the main dining area, where she had worked so many hours, serving coffee and meals, always with a smile. But now, her apron felt heavy, like a weight she couldn't carry anymore. She took it off slowly, walking to the back door without saying a word. Outside, the cool air hit her face, and for the first time, she felt a sense of freedom. But it was a freedom that came at a cost. She had no idea what she was going to do next. She turned around to look at the diner one last time, but before she could take another step, Jack appeared in the doorway. His eyes were sad but filled with understanding. He didn't say anything at first, but then he spoke softly, "I'm sorry, Emily. You didn't deserve that." Emily shook her head. "It's not your fault, Jack. I just wanted to do what was right. And now I've lost everything." Jack looked at her for a moment before reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an old, scratched-up flip phone and dialed a number. Emily didn't know who he was calling, but she could see the determination in his eyes. "Don't worry," he said, putting the phone to his ear. "I've got some people who'll help." The day started to fade into a golden evening, and the streets outside the diner felt quieter than usual. Emily stood outside, her mind racing with all the things she needed to figure out. Her heart still hurt from the conversation with Mr. Collins. She had been fired, and now she didn't know what was next. The weight of uncertainty pressed on her shoulders, but as she looked at Jack standing beside her, something inside her started to shift. She had known Jack for a while now. He was one of those regulars who always kept to himself but had a kind heart. He had come in many times, sat in his usual spot in the corner, and always greeted her with a smile. She had often wondered about his past, his life on the road, but she never asked. There was something about Jack that made people respect him without needing to know all the details. He had an aura of quiet strength. Now, standing beside him, Emily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. Jack wasn't just a quiet old man, he was someone who had seen and experienced more than most people would in a lifetime. And he had just seen her stand up for what was right, even though it had cost her everything. As Emily stood there, Jack finished the call on his phone. He slipped it back into his jacket pocket and turned to face her. There was something reassuring about his calm demeanor, like he wasn't worried, even though they both knew things had changed. "You're not alone in this," Jack said softly, his voice steady. "I've been around long enough to know that when you do the right thing, sometimes things go wrong before they go right. But they always get better. Trust me." Emily looked at him, a mix of gratitude and confusion in her heart. She hadn't expected Jack to say anything so comforting, and it made her realize just how much she needed someone to say it. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling a little. Jack smiled, his eyes twinkling with something she couldn't quite place. "You'll see. Just give it some time." Before Emily could ask any more questions, the low rumble of engines interrupted the stillness of the evening. The sound grew louder, and for a moment, Emily wondered if she was hearing things. But as the noise came closer, she realized it wasn't just one or two motorcycles. It was a whole group. A large group. The bikes turned the corner and pulled into the diner parking lot, their engines echoing through the streets. Emily stood frozen, staring in disbelief. It was like something out of a movie, hundreds of motorcycles, all with shiny chrome and leather-clad riders. They filled the lot, parked side by side, their heavy engines shutting off one by one. She had never seen so many bikers in one place. The town was small, and there were only a few bikers around, but this was something else. Jack stepped forward, his face breaking into a knowing smile. "Looks like my friends are here," he said, his tone casual as if this kind of thing happened every day. "Friends?" Emily echoed, still not quite understanding. "Yeah," Jack replied, his eyes scanning the growing crowd of bikers now stepping off their motorcycles and gathering outside the diner. "You see, I've got a lot of family." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She watched in awe as more and more bikers filed into the diner. Some were tall and muscular, others were shorter but just as imposing. They all wore leather jackets with patches on them, symbols of clubs she had never seen before. But it wasn't just their size or strength that caught her attention. It was the way they carried themselves, with pride, with purpose, as though they had all come together for something bigger than themselves. Jack, noticing her stunned expression, gave a short laugh. "These people are my brothers and sisters," he explained. "And when one of us is treated wrong, we all show up. That's how it works in our world." Emily could hardly believe what was happening. She had never seen a group of people move with such unity, such strength. It was clear that this wasn't just a group of bikers, they were family. She felt a tap on her shoulder, and when she turned around, she saw a tall woman standing there. She had fiery red hair, a leather jacket adorned with patches, and a look of quiet confidence. The woman smiled at Emily and extended her hand. "Hi, I'm Ruth," she said, her grip firm but kind. "I'm part of the crew that rides with Jack." Emily shook her hand, still trying to process everything happening around her. Ruth's presence was calming, and she could see the respect in her eyes. "I don't know what's going on," Emily admitted, her voice uncertain. "Why are all of you here?" Ruth looked around at the crowd of bikers, who were now gathering around the diner in a peaceful, almost ceremonial way. "We're here because you did the right thing." We saw what happened, and we don't stand by when someone like you gets treated unfairly. You stood up for Jack, and for that, we've got your back." Emily blinked, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never expected anything like this. She had simply stood up for Jack because it felt like the right thing to do. Now, she was surrounded by hundreds of bikers, all of them showing up to support her. The sound of motorcycles revving echoed again as even more bikers arrived, parking their bikes in the lot. The whole scene was overwhelming, and Emily could hardly believe it was real. It felt like something out of a movie, a scene of power, unity, and respect. As more bikers came through the doors, the diner started to fill. But this wasn't the chaotic, rowdy crowd Emily had feared. Instead, it was calm. The bikers took their seats with a quiet confidence, exchanging greetings with Jack, nodding to Emily, and filling the diner with an unexpected sense of camaraderie. It was as if the room had transformed into something sacred, a place where respect and kindness were the only rules. Emily watched as Ruth made her way to the counter, where Mr. Collins stood frozen in disbelief. Ruth didn't raise her voice, but her presence was enough to make anyone listen. "We've come to talk to you," she said to Mr. Collins, her tone steady but firm. Mr. Collins sputtered, trying to make sense of the situation. "What is all this? Who are you people?" "We're Jack's family," Ruth replied calmly. "And we don't take kindly to people being treated poorly." Emily watched as Mr. Collins stammered, realizing that this was no ordinary group of people. There was no denying the power that stood before him, power not in numbers or strength, but in loyalty and respect. Jack, standing beside Emily, looked at her and smiled softly. "I told you, you're not alone." Emily took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in hours, she wasn't worried. She wasn't angry. She was surrounded by people who understood what it meant to stand up for others, no matter the cost. She had made the right choice, and now, it seemed like the world was showing her that she wasn't alone. The diner, which had once been a quiet spot in a small town, was now buzzing with an energy Emily had never experienced before. The sound of motorcycle engines still echoed in the background as more bikers filled the restaurant. It wasn't chaos, though, it was a powerful, organized presence, a force that seemed to be united by something deeper than just a shared love for motorcycles. Emily had never felt so overwhelmed and amazed at the same time. What had started as a small act of kindness, a moment of standing up for Jack, had turned into something that seemed almost unreal. She stood by the door, watching as bikers of all shapes and sizes filled the diner. The room was filled with the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of mugs and plates, and the occasional laugh. Everyone seemed to be speaking in hushed tones, a kind of respectful quiet that matched the solemnity of the moment. Jack, who had been at the center of it all, had become the unspoken leader of the group. As more bikers entered, he greeted each one with a nod and a handshake, his voice calm and steady. Emily had never seen him so animated. It was as if, in that moment, he was surrounded by his own family, people who had his back, no matter what. Ruth, the fiery redhead who had introduced herself earlier, was still by the counter, talking with Mr. Collins. The manager had been shaken, his face pale, as he tried to process what was happening. Emily could hear bits and pieces of their conversation, though she couldn't make out all the words. Ruth didn't raise her voice, but her presence was commanding. She was talking with Mr. Collins, making it clear that what had happened earlier in the day, Emily being fired, wasn't going to go unnoticed. Emily felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was deeply grateful. The bikers had come to her defense in a way she could never have imagined. On the other hand, she felt a little uncomfortable. She didn't want to be the center of attention, especially in a situation like this. She hadn't wanted to cause trouble, she had only wanted to do the right thing. But now, she found herself standing in the middle of a powerful, unexpected gathering that had come together to support her. The bikers weren't here to cause chaos. There was no loud shouting, no angry protests. They were here to stand with Jack, and in doing so, they were standing with her as well. It was clear that the respect they had for each other wasn't just about the motorcycle clubs. It was about something deeper, something rooted in the way they treated people, in the way they valued loyalty, honor, and kindness. As the conversation continued between Ruth and Mr. Collins, Emily found herself approaching the counter, unsure of what to expect. She had been told by Jack that she wasn't alone, but seeing the bikers filling the diner made that statement feel even more real. Ruth finally turned and walked back toward her, a small smile on her face. She gave Emily a nod, as if signaling that the conversation had reached its conclusion. Emily could see that Ruth was trying to keep things peaceful, but there was an undeniable sense of power in the air. "What happened in the back?" Emily asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "They've made their point," Ruth said, her tone calm but firm. "Mr. Collins knows that the bikers won't just walk away quietly. He knows we won't stand for people being treated badly. This is about respect, something that's earned, not something that can be bought with money." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't sure what to expect from this moment, but it was clear that the bikers weren't looking for revenge or trouble. They were here for something much more powerful, justice, in their own way. She glanced at the crowd of bikers, many of whom had now taken their seats, sitting calmly at the tables. There was a sense of quiet determination in the room. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there to make a statement that standing up for what was right mattered. As more time passed, the atmosphere in the diner became less tense. The bikers weren't here to intimidate, they were here to support. The hum of conversation grew warmer as people began to relax. Some bikers even shared stories about the road, about the adventures they had experienced, and about the people they had met along the way. Emily had never heard such lively discussions, yet there was a peacefulness to it all. It was as if the diner had transformed into a place where respect was the foundation, where everyone was valued. Mr. Collins, still in shock, stood by the counter, glancing nervously at the bikers. His usual confidence had faded, replaced by uncertainty. It was clear that he had never encountered anything like this before. Emily could see that he was struggling to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The bikers weren't going anywhere. They had made their statement. They weren't leaving until they were certain that Emily's dignity had been restored. Jack, who had been sitting quietly at his table, finally stood up and made his way over to Emily. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low but comforting. "I told you, you're not alone in this. We've got your back. You've earned that respect today." Emily looked at him, her eyes filling with gratitude. She had never expected anything like this. She had only done what she thought was right, and now she found herself surrounded by people who understood that. As the night wore on, the bikers continued to chat among themselves, their presence filling the room with a quiet power. Emily couldn't help but smile as she looked around at the people who had come to her aid. She had always thought of herself as someone who kept to the background, who didn't want to make waves. But now, she realized that sometimes standing up for what's right meant making waves, and that was okay. Finally, Ruth came over to Emily, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've got a lot of people behind you, Emily. Don't ever forget that. You stood up for someone, and you showed us all what it means to be strong. Not everyone has that kind of courage." Emily smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of it." Ruth chuckled. "No one ever does. But that's how it goes sometimes. You do the right thing, and the right people find you. Remember, you've got family now." The words struck deep. Emily had never felt so understood, so supported. She had gone from feeling lost and alone to standing in the middle of a family, one that had her back no matter what. As the bikers finished their meals and began to leave, Emily stood at the door, watching them all file out one by one. The last bike roared to life, and the parking lot slowly emptied, leaving behind only the quiet hum of the diner. But Emily knew that things had changed. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the diner that afternoon. She had found something much more important than a job. She had found a community. A community that valued kindness, respect, and loyalty above all else. And as she stood there, watching the last of the bikers ride away, Emily couldn't help but smile. The world was bigger than she had ever imagined, and she was a part of it now. The next few days after the bikers had come to the diner were a blur for Emily. She could hardly believe what had happened, the way her simple act of standing up for Jack had turned into something so much bigger. The feeling of unity and respect in the diner that night lingered with her long after the bikers had left. It was hard to put into words, but it felt like something had shifted in her life. At first, she wasn't sure what to expect when she woke up the next morning. The thought of walking past the diner, of seeing Mr. Collins again, filled her with uncertainty. But Jack's words still rang in her ears, "You've got family now." It was comforting, but also made her realize that she wasn't just going to walk away from everything. There was something worth fighting for, something bigger than just a job. Emily decided to take the first step that morning. Instead of heading to the diner, she went for a walk in the park to clear her head. As she walked along the familiar path, the wind in her hair and the sun on her face, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had always been someone who tried to keep her head down, never wanting to stir the pot. But now, after everything that had happened, she knew that staying silent wasn't always the right thing to do. She had made a choice to stand up for Jack, and in doing so, she had learned something about herself. The next few hours felt like a waiting game. Emily spent time at the library, reading books she hadn't had time for before. She also visited a local job center, handing out resumes and talking to anyone who would listen. The uncertainty still gnawed at her, but she didn't feel as lost as she had before. Every step she took, no matter how small, felt like progress. Around midday, as she was sitting in a small coffee shop, trying to calm her nerves, her phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name, Jack. "Meet me at the diner at 2 p.m. I've got something to show you." Her curiosity piqued, Emily quickly finished her coffee and left the shop. The walk to the diner felt longer than usual, her mind racing with possibilities. She wondered if the bikers had planned something else, if Jack had more to say, or if they were just going to let things go. When she arrived, she stood outside for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The familiar jingle of the doorbell welcomed her, but something was different this time. The diner felt quieter, calmer, almost as if it was holding its breath. Emily walked to the counter, where Jack was already sitting, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Sit down, Emily. I've got something to share with you." She took a seat across from him, her heart beating a little faster. "What's going on, Jack? Is everything okay?" Jack's smile deepened, but there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. "You did something incredible the other day, and now people are starting to notice." Emily tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" "Just trust me," he said with a wink. "Everything's going to be all right. I've got something for you." Before Emily could ask any more questions, the door to the diner opened, and Ruth stepped inside, followed by a few other bikers. Emily raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What's happening here?" Jack chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "Just wait, you'll see." Ruth walked over to Emily, her expression calm but filled with purpose. "We've been talking, and we've come up with something. We want to help you get back on your feet, Emily." The words hit Emily like a wave. "What do you mean? How?" Ruth smiled warmly. We know what it's like to struggle, and we know how important it is to have a strong community behind you. So, we're offering you something. Emily's heart raced as she waited for Ruth to continue. We've made a call to a few local businesses. Some people who care about doing the right thing. We've already spoken to a couple of places that are looking for someone like you, a hard worker, someone who stands up for what's right. And we think you'd be a perfect fit. The shock on Emily's face was impossible to hide. She had never expected anything like this. You're helping me get a job. Absolutely, Ruth said, her eyes filled with sincerity. We believe in you, Emily. And we want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. We're family now, and we've got your back. Emily didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life just trying to get by, keeping to herself, and now she was being offered something she had never dreamed of, a chance to start fresh, to have the support of people who truly cared. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Jack reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. It's your time now, Emily. Don't be afraid to take it. You've earned it. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she tried to find the words to express what she was feeling. I don't know what to say. This is unbelievable. You don't have to say anything, Jack said, his voice gentle. Just know that you've got the strength to do anything you set your mind to. You've shown it already. Ruth nodded in agreement. We've already made some calls, and you'll be meeting with a few business owners who are willing to give you a shot. No more worrying. You've earned your place in this world, Emily. Emily took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as she processed everything. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could see a future for herself. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was full of possibilities. She looked at the bikers, at the people who had shown up for her without hesitation, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice shaky with emotion. Jack smiled, standing up and giving her a gentle hug. You don't have to thank us. Just keep doing the right thing. That's all we need from you. The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of interviews and phone calls. Emily was offered several job opportunities, each one more exciting than the last. But it wasn't just about the job, it was about the support, the community she now had, the people who would help her succeed. A week later, Emily stood outside the diner again, this time with a new sense of purpose. She had accepted a position at a local community center, where she would help organize events for people in need. It wasn't the highest paying job, but it was one that gave her meaning, that made her feel like she was truly helping others. As she walked through the door of the diner, she was greeted by a new sense of peace. She knew that no matter what life threw her way, she had a family now, one that would always have her back. And as she looked around, she knew that the road ahead, while uncertain, was full of promise. And so, as the sun set on the small town, Emily smiled. She had found something more important than a job or security. She had found a purpose, and with it, the strength to face whatever came next.